Good afternoon and welcome once again to Fired Up. I'm your host for the show, Bob Irwin. We are broadcasting from the studios of the American Guns and Glory Network here in Las Vegas, Nevada. This show, as regular listeners know, is about guns, related political issues, and self-defense issues. Fired Up with Bob Irwin is on YouTube at the American Guns and Glory Network, with a new show coming out every Thursday around 5 p.m. And they stay online forever, so you can look at old shows anytime you like. We are also broadcast on the Nevada Talk Network, which is 8 radio stations throughout Nevada. The shows are all simulcast at the same time, which is on Saturdays at noon. You can find the various stations where they are at KELY1230.com. And they'll give you the stations in your area. That appears on our crawl somewhere, that information. If you want to get a hold of me with a question or a comment, we appreciate that. You can send an email to bob@firedupmail.com or leave a message on my office recorder, which is 702-257-1060. If you leave contact information, we will return your call and answer questions as we can. A question for my guests can be directed to that same telephone number or website, and I will forward it to the guest. There are several hundred defensive uses of firearm every week in the United States, depending on who's doing the counting, 200 to 300. Always on the show, we present a couple or three of those that are defensive uses that are not often covered by the mainstream media. Somebody's got to tell people what is really going on with guns for self-defense. Some are good shooting, some are questionable, some are just plain wrong, and sometimes the shooter is being run over by the state, which we've got one of those coming up here. As Fired Up is a nationwide show, our disclaimer here is we're giving you advice, and my attorneys or guests are giving you advice on it's designed to keep you out of trouble, keep you out of jail. But the laws vary from state to state dramatically. What's a good shooting in Nevada isn't a good shooting in New York City, etc. Our advice is intended to simply keep you safe and alive and from losing a civil lawsuit. That all being said, wow, that took like 6 minutes. My guest today is Nevada and California attorney Donald Green. Welcome again, Don.
Thanks, Bob. Of course, it's always a pleasure being here. For those of you who don't know, my name is Don Green, and I'm a lawyer in California and Nevada. This is my 35th year of practice. DonGreenLaw.com. The substantial emphasis of our practice is gun issues at all levels, even from not being able to possess a firearm, criminal cases, civil appeals before the ATF, FBI, just about anything to do with firearms. We're also heavily involved in litigation and consultation with federal firearms licensees and private individuals, and we're also at most of the gun shows. But thank you for having me as a guest today.
In fact, this show is going up tonight, and Don and I both will be at the gun show at downtown at the
World Market Center.
World Market Center.
Yes, in the pavilions.
Mm-hmm. You can look up on the World Market Center, and it'll show you a little map of how to get there. Mm-hmm. I'm going to try and find it for the first time tomorrow.
Get there early. Yeah. Get there early.
The parking sometimes is a problem and whatnot, but anyway. This is from the Gwinnett Daily Post. The article was published on the 5th of January this year in Snellville, Georgia. On New Year's Eve, Sunday, an armed robbery suspect tried to rob a Craigslist seller of a cell phone. The Shelbyville police responded to reports of a male shooting into a vehicle at a Walmart parking lot on Scenic Highway. This is according to a detective named Kevin Say. They detained the suspected shooter to further investigate the incident. By the time I got there, this is the detective, the shooting victim was at Eastside Medical Center. He was shot 3 times in the left triceps area, and we were able to interview him and his brother, who was driving the car, and his cousin, who was a front seat passenger. This is the 3 guys. In the course of the investigation, police determined the shooter was meeting with the armed robbery suspects, a pair of 21-year-olds, to sell them a cell phone. That's when things went wrong. Basically, the person who got shot produced a firearm to rob the would-be buyer, The buyer jumped out of his vehicle and shot back, hitting one of the robbers. The detective said it turned out the guy who got shot wasn't the victim, but actually the offender. He and his cousin were arrested and the victim was not charged. The intended victim in this case worked as a security guard, which apparently allowed him to be carrying his gun. The two robbers were charged with armed robbery, aggravated assault, possession of a firearm during commission of a felony, obstruction of justice for lying to the investigators. That's an interesting charge. We expect people to lie. Having been a cop for a while, you know, they're lying. And if you lie to the officers, say, did you just murder the guy? If you say no, they arrest you for lying.
Yes.
That just doesn't seem fair. You're supposed to be allowed to lie to the investigators if you're the suspect. Anyway, they're both being held in the Gwinnett County Jail without bond. What we have here is pretty clearly that the bad guys picked an armed victim, the wrong guy. One sure way to lower crime rates is to make future criminals think about how they're going to react, and maybe flipping burgers is safer than trying to rob people on the street. Of course, you might be flipping burgers and then the food place gets robbed.
Yes.
I guess. So, would an unarmed victim has survived this encounter? If the guy had not been armed, and got three opponents, at least two were actively involved in going after him with firearms apparently, and he wouldn't have survived without the gun. So that's why we carry guns for.
Yes.
What
Bob,
do you think?
here's a point for your viewers and your listeners. Who was the real victim in this case at first? Remember, the police said that one of the victims, the shooting victim, had been taken to the Eastside Medical Center. He was actually the robber, but originally identified as a victim. So very important. Anytime you're involved in a concealed weapons or a firearm shooting where the use of the firearm is legal in self-defense, identify yourself to the police as the good guy. I'm the one with the white hair and the burgundy shirt. My left hand is in the air, my right hand is holding the cell phone. Identify yourself, because you're going to, if not, you're going to get into a situation like this. Once the firearm was produced and the security officer was actually buying the cell phone in a parking lot, and where the sale was through Craigslist. This is the second example that you and I have had in the past 2 or 3 months in which someone has bought something on Craigslist and ends up being a shooting. So moral of the story is that, you know, don't buy anything on Craigslist. Be aware of where you're buying it. Why don't you just go to the store and buy it instead of buying something on Craigslist? Avoid the conflict. The security officer didn't. He should have known better, but he's still alive. And this also proves that the situation is fluid. Again, police officers are saying the victim is actually at the hospital when the victim is actually the robber, and the victim is the security officer, possibly still at the scene.
Yeah, they took the other guys took the guy to the hospital. He's got 3 bullet holes in him, and is the hospital going to call the police? Of course. No matter how good your story is, you come in with a gunshot wound, they're going to call the police. And of course, that, given the time of day and this and that, they immediately locked it on to being this attempted robbery. So the guy did it exactly right. This is just the bad guys being bad guys and more or less idiots. We're going to take a break here for about one commercial to get one of our sponsors on board here. And we'll be right back with an even worse case of this same type. Don't go away. He's incredible. Maggie teaches at Bass Pro as well as the Clark County Shooting Park and major gun shows here in Clark County and in Reno. You can check out her classes at ccwmaggie.com. That's ccwmagie.com. Training is necessary. Thank you. And we are back. This really disgusting case is from the Daily News in New York City, New York State, obviously. This took place was reported on 12/31 of 2017, Christmas or New Year's Eve. A Brooklyn woman shot her ex-boyfriend in the neck on Saturday when he tried to kick his way into her apartment, according to the police department. A 30-year-old man stormed into his ex-girlfriend's apartment building on Bristol Street near Blake Avenue, if you know where that is, in Brownsville, at 6:13 p.m., according to police. So it's dark out. When the ex-boyfriend kicked her door, he found the 52-year-old woman standing in the threshold with a handgun. She pulled the trigger and hit her ex once in the neck. Medics rushed him to Brookdale Hospital, where he is listed in stable condition. The cops found the woman's .40 caliber handgun at the scene. She recently moved to the city from North Carolina. So the weapon, while it was legal where she had been, she did not have a New York permit as yet. You can't own a firearm in New York City unless you have a permit, which takes a rigmarole for the police department. I'm told now it still runs about a year and a half to get a permit, and all it has to be approved by all these people that you're safe with a gun. She didn't have that. So she's got no permit to have the gun, even though she used it clearly to save her life. The ex-boyfriend allegedly has an extensive criminal history. They covered a lot of that on the backup to this, where he's been convicted of about everything from beating and all sorts of things. Now, at the end of this, he's in the hospital. The woman is taken into custody, and charges were pending early Sunday, according to police. Now, the guy, no doubt, will be charged with something when he gets out of the hospital, or they're figuring some way to keep him in the hospital without having to pay his medical bills, of course. But the woman was taken into custody. How could she be charged with a crime? Well, she's not. Anywhere in the civilized world, this would be what we would consider to be justified self-defense. But the problem is, the gun she had was not legal.
That's correct.
So she'd moved recently from North Carolina, where she owned it legally, had no idea what the local laws are. She uses the gun to defend herself, and now she is out on bail for a crime. Now, if he's charged later on, fine. You know, he will be, I'm sure. But now that he's the victim of this gun-wielding, it's just, she's 52 years old, he's 30. I don't even know where to start.
Bob, listeners and viewers are going to say, doesn't federal law allow me to transport a firearm across state lines? Answer, yes. Transport the weapon. And they have to look further in the statute, so long as the weapon is legal in the receiving jurisdiction in which you are traveling. So, for example, suppose you take the same Glock or the same .40 caliber, which is capable of chambering more than 10 rounds in a magazine from Nevada to California. Although it's legal to transport the weapon is not legal in California, so therefore in California, and in this case New York, you are committing possibly a felony charge. Will she be charged in New York? Answer, yes.
She is.
What's our precedent? The Bernie Getz case, late 70s, early 80s, where the guy was on the subway and shot 2 or 3 muggers, or shot at them, He was found not guilty of the shooting, but found guilty of the felony possession of the firearm on the subway, because either the weapon was legal or it's illegal to carry the firearm on the subway, and I don't know if he had a permit.
He did not. No.
In this case here, you have to know the laws of the jurisdiction in which you are traveling or in which you intend to live. Now, North Carolina, I don't profess to know all the laws there, but I do know that our concealed weapons permits in Nevada are accepted in California, in North Carolina, and we accept theirs. There's reciprocity. But that doesn't mean that when you go from North Carolina to New York that you're going to be let off the hook simply because it's legal or you had a permit to carry it. You still have to check with the local laws. So in defense of this woman, she did defend herself. Can she defend herself on the Castle Doctrine? The answer is yes. As to the shooting, because he broke in, he's going to beat her up, started to beat her up, and she shot him in the neck. But the Castle Doctrine doesn't protect you when you are possessing the firearm illegally or the weapon itself is illegal, such as this weapon might not be legal in New York. So there's a number of things which you have to do. So if someone calls me and asks me, or they talk to me at a gun show, or we're doing these shows here. So average citizen, I have to know all of this? The answer is yes. Or if you don't carry the firearm.
Exactly correct. And she is going to get, very likely, run over by the New York law. And it was clearly her gun. It was in her house. She admitted it's her gun. Of course, you know, she's not being evasive here. She admitted what happened. The guy's kicking in the door. She shot him. And all of this stuff you'll hear, we've got a bit coming up in a while about reciprocity and so forth. But like I said, this is legally self-defense wherever you want to go in the civilized world. But if you've got an illegal weapon, there you are. You know, if it's against the law to have a spear and you spear a guy who's trying to break into your house and the state law says you can't possess a spear, you're still going to be charged with that crime. And she's in the worst case scenario at possible, being in New York City.
That's right, New York City.
And yeah, I mean, she's toast.
Unless her lawyer can convince the jury on some kind of an issue of like jury nullification, that, okay, suppose she did break the law, but at that moment, what was more paramount? Her saving her life, or if she had children there, or letting this man come in and do her obvious great bodily harm, or even causing her death. So there might be an issue there concerning jury nullification, but New York juries are historically, you know, yeah, you try to save your life, but you can't have the gun. But you can't have the gun because it's illegal, even though you're trying to defend yourself.
And we've discussed, and I'm sure Don's been involved in a couple of them, and I've been involved in one or two, where the defense really tried to use the jury nullification idea to convince the jury that this shouldn't be a crime, and it almost never works because the judges allow you at the local court level to challenge the validity of the law. That's an appellate courts, and you raise it simply to allow yourself an appeal. But I haven't seen yet where they let an attorney, I haven't been nearly as many cases as you have.
I haven't seen it either.
Where they actually let that information in. As soon as you start to go down that path, you get this is not the U.S. Supreme Court, Mr. Green. Have a nice life, but you cannot introduce evidence that the law is incorrect. And you're done. I mean, I know of cases where lawyers have tried to do that and found themselves cited and sitting in the jury box. We had a couple in Nevada where somebody got in an argument with the judge and got themselves hooked up. This is just, it's impossible to defend this except on an appellate level. So you're looking, it's defensible, but it's going to take an appellate ruling, and you're really in the woods. if this goes to court in New York and the appellate court in New York decides this is an invalid law, will the government appeal it? Will New York City appeal that?
It's quite possible.
Absolutely, yeah. They're going to lose all their laws. So they can't let it go, and they got free lawyers paid by the taxpayers. This is just tough. I want to go back and say this one more time. If your life is in danger and you need to defend yourself, defend yourself. If you're alive, attorneys and experts can do things to help you. If you're dead, there's no point. So first, don't die in the confrontation. After that, obey all the rules we're telling you about, if it's appropriate, but don't get killed. We're going to break for another brief commercial, and we will be back in just a moment or so. A word from our sponsors. Thanks. Do you have a firearms trust or need one to pass your guns along? The Justice Department, BATF, has changed the rules in the recent past. If you have a firearm trust, particularly a Class 3 firearm trust, it needs updating. My longtime friend, Attorney Jerry Creed, is an expert in these trusts. Call Jerry at 702-806-7777 at his Summerlin office for a free appointment and evaluation of your situation. That's Jerry Creed, 702-806-7777. Don't end up leaving your firearms to the government because you have an invalid or out-of-date trust. Hey, and we are back. Thanks for hanging on with us. I've got a story on the outline that we're going to talk about some gun laws and some gun statistics in Baltimore where they have just excited themselves because they found two guys in a justifiable self-defense shooting. They reclassified in Baltimore that shooting from a murder to self-defense. So that lowered their crime rate for 2017 by 2 shootings.
That's amazing.
And it made them look better because they were doing like the left wing does and saying all deaths by gunfire, 95% of which are justifiable one way or the other. But you can't all deaths by gunfire, then the gun of course is committing a crime, and here we go. But anyway, Baltimore was able to lower their crime rate to less than the previous year by 1 or 2 murders. Therefore, they're doing a good job in police work. The FBI classified these two shootings as self-defense, so they took them off their crime.
They're no longer murders.
They're no longer murders. So if you work around the court system enough, you will discover that things that sometimes appear to be manslaughter are murders, and murders are manslaughter, and self-defense are. It all comes down to who's got the most money and who's got the smarter lawyer, but that's for another show. We've had a lot of stuff going on the federal and state level about new gun laws that are coming down the pike, and I wanted to give Don some time to talk about some of the stuff that we find worrisome, particularly the federal laws, because with the federals restricting guns, you can't run off to the next state and sell your gun or move to Wyoming. If federal law is a federal law and you're stuck, you can't export guns. That's already against the law. So we're down to Dianne Feinstein's turn them in.
That's correct.
Charge on.
Well, what's happening now, Dianne Feinstein, as we know, in California, is very anti-gun. But we have to look at who's behind her. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of money at stake here for the anti-gun lobby, so why do they want it? But what's happening now is that Dianne Feinstein and some other senators have introduced legislation in the United States Senate to ban almost everything conceivably which even looks remotely like an assault rifle or an assault weapon. Everything from the flash suppressor to the muzzle brake to the type of action to to the feeding of the magazine, to the types of magazines, to the magazine, to the capacity, the pistol grip, the collapsible stock, the expanding stock, and now we have those bump stocks with the incident we had here in Las Vegas back in October. But what's happening now is that the definitions are now becoming so broad, and not only definitions, they're actually naming the types of weapons and the brands. For example, a Colt AR-15 type rifle. They're actually, every conceivable brand, they're talking about it. They're banning specific types of ammunition. And all of this is in this huge omnibus bill. And the reason why they're not going to get it passed with the current Senate, because the Republicans have a majority, but I think the Democrats are getting their 2 cents in, and this is where the gun lobby and your viewers and your radio listeners should take notice. What can I, as the average citizen, do? Well, they can contact their particular legislators or their senators and assembly people, because what's boiling down to this is that most everything except an old bolt action or a musket or some type of a black powder pistol, or just about everything is going to be included in these lists. Like California, for example, a list doesn't allow some revolvers in certain calibers. The .454, the .500 Smith & Wesson are all illegal. Now California outlaws specifically 50 caliber BMG ammo, but yet 50 caliber Action Express through for the Desert Eagle is still legal. But that's going to change. But everything, as we pointed out before the show, that the flash suppressors, the chokes, does it look like a flash suppressor? Does it? And on CNN the other day when they showed a guy with a shotgun, it was a single barrel shotgun. It looked like it could have been a skeet gun, but the way they turned it. But on the end of it was the choke.
Yeah, the choke.
And he said, here's a shotgun which has a suppressor, a silencer. Now, I'm sure that he meant to say that it looks like a silencer, but it's not. But this is where the average citizens who don't know any better are seeing that and says, oh my God, there are shotguns with suppressors on them. So, and if it's threaded, we talked about threaded. Is it threaded? Now they're going to use that watchword. Oh, the barrel is threaded, which can fit some kind of a flash suppressor or a suppressor or a silencer.
And the bill outlaws guns with a threaded muzzle. Shotgun, most of them nowadays are threaded inside for choke tubes. The bill doesn't say threaded inside or outside. It says if the muzzle's threaded.
Yes.
So all of those sporting shotguns, till it gets to the Supreme Court, would become unlawful.
That's
because
correct.
they have a threaded muzzle. You'd have to be so specific in the way this whole thing is written. It's a joke. And as I said when we were talking before, if this goes through, which is unlikely this time, but they're positioning themselves to make a run.
That's correct. Yes.
And as Dianne Feinstein actually said, she would rather, I think she's quoted as saying, or was it Pelosi, one or the other, that they should just turn them all in. Anything that resembles,
turn them in,
should just be turned in. The Australian system's good. For those of you who don't live in Australia, they did a turn in that they got away with under their laws because they paid the people for their guns. It was a mandatory buying of guns by the government. I almost said buyback, but of course the government never owned them, so it isn't a buyback. They are simply saying, Don, that .38 you're carrying is now unlawful. Our committee says it's worth $14. Here's your $14.
That's right.
Give us the gun. And you have no gun. This is getting real scary to me on the federal level. If they maintain or get the seats they're looking for in the House and in the Senate, the gun industry is doomed. This woman is actually still in charge. Vote. Got it? Vote.
And in Nevada, now that our legal marijuana law is now about 7-8 months old, it's still against the law to be a user of marijuana, whether it's medicinal or whether it's recreational, to own, possess, carry, or purchase a firearm. Marijuana equals no guns per ATF and FBI, period, no exceptions.
Yeah, we're going to hit that on probably the next show I do with Don on the marijuana thing. It's been going on for a while. Anyway, we're running out of time, so I want to thank you for watching Fired Up.
Thank you.
Please share this broadcast with your friends and sponsor or support our sponsors. Capitalism keeps this show on the air. We'll be back next Thursday with another show here on YouTube at the American Guns and Glory Network. Have a good evening.